Today, in the Economic War Room, a congressional scandal bigger than Watergate. What you need to know. What this means for our national security, your pocketbook, and what you can do about it. Now, join Kevin Freeman in the Economic War Room.
June 17th, 1972. Police reports indicate a break-in at the Democrat National Committee headquarters. Bob Woodward, a 20-something reporter for the Washington Post, began to uncover the greatest political scandal in American history. He was soon joined by Carl Bernstein, and together they awakened America to a news story that would take down a president. Of course, I'm referring to Watergate, whose very name is synonymous with political failure. When Richard Nixon was impeached just 2 years later, America was dramatically changed, in some ways forever. Those were days in which the American press was eager to tell a story, and the Congress was anxious to get to the truth. Fast forward to today. We're nearly half a century past Watergate, and there's another scandal related to the Democrat National Committee. But this one is not just political. Did a foreign government gain access to the sensitive email and communications of dozens of members of Congress? The answer may shock you, and believe it or not, it's not Russia. The scandal is being ignored by the mainstream media and covered up by the Congress. But it's bigger than Watergate. Why should you care? Because this scandal exposes a very clear and present danger to your way of life. It's an economic war, and you're the ultimate target. I'm sad to report that our Congress has been compromised, and this threatens our liberty and our livelihood. Congress has the power over how much money you earn and how much you get to keep. Congress determines whether or not highways get built. Congress determines how patents get granted. Congress decides how you get medical care. Congress decides how much money the government spends and how much money of debt that they put on your children. Like it or not, Congress has a big say in your future. So don't you think there are people who would love to compromise your elected representative? People who ensure that Congress no longer works for you, but instead works for a foreign interest. You've always known that something is wrong in Washington. When we enter the Economic War Room, you're going to learn one of the key reasons why. Why are so many of the people we elect to Congress suddenly compromised? We're going to start our discussion with Frank Gaffney from the Center for Security Policy. Frank is an expert in national security, and he worked both for a Democrat senator and later as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for President Reagan. We'll then turn to Luke Rosiak of the Daily Caller News Foundation. Luke is like the Woodward and Bernstein reporter of our day. He's taken the lead in uncovering a scandal that is about to be swept under the rug. After Luke, we'll visit with Bob McEwen, a six-term former Ohio congressman. We'll get his perspective on what you should expect from your representatives. Finally, we'll share our battle plan. What should you do to protect your family? So welcome to the Economic War Room. What you're about to learn is how a small group of naturalized citizens found their way to the pinnacle of power in Washington. How one man, Imran Awan, talked his way into a sensitive job in Congress as the head of IT support for a single member of Congress. Within a short time, he was employing a good number of his family members. They ran IT operations for dozens of congressional offices. While Imran had an IT background, most of his family did not, and yet they seemed to be paid as much as chiefs of staff, whether they showed up for work or not. The problem is that the House Inspector General documented serious issues with Imran Awan and his family surrounding unauthorized access to congressional servers. There are reports of connections with Pakistani intelligence. At one point, he even tried to flee the country with hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the Justice Department finally caught up with Imran, he was charged with bank fraud, not cybersecurity. He was given a slap on the wrist, a sentence of just 3 months of supervised release. There wasn't even a fine. Why is this being ignored by the press? Why does this seem to be covered up by both Democrats and Republicans in Congress? You're about to learn why. This may be worse than Watergate, and you need to learn what you should do about it. Let's turn first to Frank Gaffney. Frank, you've been around Washington since the 1970s. You used to work for Scoop Jackson, the famous Democrat senator from Washington State. Can you tell us about this House IT scandal?
This is, I think, the most extraordinary national security scandal of my professional lifetime. I've been doing this for some 40 years. And honestly, Kevin, I can't recall something that comes close. The story is that you had some 5 or 6 people who were either Pakistani expats or married to them, who had managed to inveigle themselves inside the offices of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and a number of other members of Congress. The exact number isn't clear to me. I think it's at least 40. I've heard numbers as high as 60, even 80. All Democrats, all members of the House of Representatives, and all using this gang dominated by a fellow by the name of Imran Awan to gain services for their information technology purposes, their emails, their correspondence, official and otherwise. But along with access to their passwords and servers, of course, came the opportunity for these Pakistani nationals to see an awful lot of other stuff. And reportedly, they have gained access to a variety of other servers on Capitol Hill and information, for example, from committees on which these members served, which included the House Intelligence Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the National Security or Armed Services Committee, as it's called, the Homeland Security Committee, and the like. And the trouble is, Kevin, as you understand, that anyone who has access to that kind of information may be gleaning sensitive information that is of an official character. At minimum, you can bet they're getting sensitive information of a personal character. And if what you're interested in doing, if all else fails, as a foreign entity, let's say, or foreign nationals, is gaining influence over, perhaps ability to coerce, blackmail, influential members of the United States House of Representatives, it's hard to top the opportunities that would be presented for doing it if you ran their IT services. And the way some of these members have responded to all of this, most especially Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who actually threatened the chief of the Capitol Police, who were doing the investigation of all of this, if he didn't release a laptop that was material evidence, there were going to be consequences. I mean, it was an overt threat. That suggests to me Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been blackmailed or has some other reason to be trying desperately to cover this up. When you put into the mix, and this is an inference rather than something that's been proven so far, that you probably had Pakistani intelligence, the ISI as it's called, if not actually running this ring, at least benefiting from its activities. It is a national security problem, I believe, of a very high magnitude. And the fact that the servers in the House of Representatives were being accessed from Pakistan by these guys on some occasions makes it a certitude that you had ISI penetration, not just secondhand, but access into those servers as well. So this is a huge problem. And the fact that the U.S. government has essentially suppressed information about it, and the Justice Department has taken a dive on the prosecution, at least of this ringleader, Imran Awan, is, as I say, just a scandal of epic proportions. And it needs a further and independent investigation at the earliest moment by the House of Representatives itself.
No doubt, Frank. We've heard about how the Chinese tried to insert a spy as Senator Feinstein's driver. But having the keys to the IT kingdom with passwords and members of Congress, that's crazy.
Frankly, my working assumption is this was a Pakistani intelligence operation, if not from the get-go, certainly early on. And it wasn't the first of these. Pakistani intelligence services have run ops on the Hill in the past, and quite successfully so. The question is not why were the Democrats involved determined not to press charges. That's pretty obvious. They didn't want anybody finding out any more about what they'd done that was either turning a blind eye to evidence that they had a problem, or in some cases, at least one of the chiefs of staff to one of these Democratic members of Congress was actually seemingly complicit in the theft of government hardware, equipment from the bank account. And indeed, one of the members in question, this one, had 10% of her budget apparently absconded with as a result of this computer theft racket. And her chief of staff was complicit in it, as I understand it. So this is a problem on a lot of different levels. The question isn't so much why didn't the Democrats want any hay made of this? Where was the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives? This is simply mind-boggling to me that they let the Democrats skate on this. You can bet if Nancy Pelosi were the speaker and it were Republicans who had a similar kind of problem, say white supremacists, for example, running their IT services, this would have been above the fold headline news for every day of years now. And instead, it's gotten essentially no attention whatsoever. That is a scandal in its own right.
Thank you, Frank, for your always valuable insights. I agree. It's very puzzling as to why the Republicans have not taken advantage of this clearly Democrat scandal. It makes me wonder, is the Republican congressional leadership implicated in some way? Well, it seems that many people are busy trying to cover up a scandal. One man has been tirelessly working to uncover the truth. That man is Luke Rosiak of the Daily Caller News Foundation. Welcome. Would you tell us how you first uncovered the House IT scandal and why you know it to be important?
So I'm an investigative reporter, and one of the things that I specialize in is using data analysis. And I've used that in the past to kind of look at the records of how Congress spends its money. And there's really not a whole lot of money there. I mean, I know it's kind of a joke to say Congress is wasteful or whatever, but they're really not. I mean, the waste is in the executive branch. They don't have much money. And so there was right after the inauguration, kind of a classic news dump situation, there was a tiny little story in BuzzFeed that said that these IT guys had been banned from the network for misconduct. And they said that they were brothers, but no one knew who their names were. So I did some computer analysis that found, what kind of nepotism is going on in Congress? How many sets of three brothers are there working there? So I found these guys' names, and then I kind of jumped into their background and saw the bankruptcies. They had these 12 LLCs, which I didn't even mention, but all these really suspicious financial patterns. And from there, I just tried to figure out, is this a financial scheme in the House of Representatives, or is it something worse? But, basically I think this was a news dump that was probably carefully timed, and it made sure that no one else was looking, because if other people saw what I saw back in February of 2017, and everyone else was paying attention to the inauguration of Donald Trump, I think that this would have been a massive story. And I think that when Democrats decided to kick the can down the road until after the election, they also thought that it was going to be massive.
Well, this is one of the biggest scandals in modern history. It's not just criminal activity we're talking about, it's potentially a potent form of economic warfare. It's economic espionage with multiple smoking guns. Anyone who looks at this can see how rotten it is. What I'd like you to do is start at the beginning and explain what you've found so far and why it's important.
Basically, this is a family of IT guys who were working for the House of Representatives, but were infiltrating the servers and funneling data off the House network in ways that are really frightening. And it started a day after the DNC emails were published by WikiLeaks. That's when the Inspector General of the House of Representatives went to authorities and said, you know, we've uncovered unauthorized access on the House network, and these guys are logging into servers of members who have previously fired them for a variety of reasons. They're impersonating members. They're taking data off the network, and they're taking steps to cover their tracks. And the context of this would have been obvious at that point. I mean, WikiLeaks was ensuring that cybersecurity was on everyone's mind. And what we saw was a really fascinating reaction from the House. It was immediately decided that they were going to cover this thing up. And so they basically took no action. They blocked the IG from investigating. And they said, you can't talk to these guys. You can't search their emails. You can't do anything. And they basically just punted until after the election. And the more we learned about these guys, the more frightening this was. And really this wasn't because of, you know, not to toot my own horn, but we learned a lot of this stuff through journalism and through stuff I was doing in the Daily Caller News Foundation, because the House and the government authorities, they weren't doing anything with it. And these guys, first of all, they had really no IT training. One of the guys, Imran Awan, he did. But pretty soon they had his whole family, like 5 or 6 guys on the payroll, and they were all making $165,000 a year. So these guys got paid like $7 million over the years. They were making as much as chiefs of staff, and they didn't have any training. And a lot of these guys were like no-show employees. One of them actually worked at McDonald's. Another one was a college student. One of them was like running a used car dealership. And so these guys had full access to all the emails and files of 1 in 5 House members. And they were spending good portions of the year over in Pakistan, where they're from. And they would work from Pakistan, logging into Congress. And so you look into these guys' histories, and they have all the telltale signs of everything you'd be concerned about for someone to have access to all this stuff. One of them had like $1 million bankruptcy. One of them was running, you know, this purported car dealership, which was called CIA, and it took $100,000 from an Iraqi government minister who's been tied to Hezbollah. This guy, after he was banned from Congress, Imran Awan had a secret email address that was providing a backdoor into the system. It was called 123@mail.house.gov. 123. What kind of person has an address like that? And so I realized after they finally banned him, and again, they kicked the can down the road until after the election because they didn't want him to know about this. Finally, like 2 days after Trump's inauguration, they banned these guys from Congress, but they don't arrest them or anything. And I find he's still got an active email address. Why didn't they kick off 123@mail.house.gov? Because it was hidden under the name of an intelligence specialist for Congressman Andre Carson, who's on the Intelligence Committee and one of the 2 Muslim members of Congress. And so the list kind of goes on and on about all these guys, these connections that these guys have, these shady deals. Everyone basically alleges that these guys are extortionists and, you know, money launderers and blackmailers, and they shake you down for a penny. People told me they would sell their mom for a penny. Basically, these guys are people, I believe, after 2 years of investigating, who are not directly affiliated with any government agencies. My theory, they are freelance opportunists, mercenaries who would do anything for money. And I believe they use that access in the halls of Congress. And you look at what happened with the DNC emails or any other number of examples, these members of Congress are very vulnerable to people that have all their emails, because who among us wouldn't want our emails released? I mean, you don't have to be Wasserman Schultz and to be kind of rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders to not want your emails released. All of us have emails that would make us look bad. When you're a member of Congress, doubly so. And so when you give these guys access, these horrible, horrible guys who everyone who knows them hates, the prospect of extortion and blackmail is very, very real.
Well, Luke, you have been the Woodward and Bernstein following the scandal. It seems to get stranger every single day. So I have a 2-part question. First, what has surprised you the most as you started to unravel the story? And second, please give us some insight. Help us understand why there's such a massive cover-up in Congress. Why is no one paying attention?
It's very interesting to me how this quickly became a cover-up and how what people were more interested in was the narrative and how this affects politics for Democrats rather than, national security and cybersecurity. And when I started writing about this, I genuinely thought that the Democrats were going to be very concerned about what happened and that they were going to take urgent action against this guy. And that's all they really had to do was, fire him and distance themselves from him. And instead, what we saw is this extraordinary effort. He had members of Congress writing like op-eds in the Washington Post to protect him. This extraordinary effort that no normal low-level IT guy who's just around to like plug in your mouse would ever be afforded. And it really just highlights again the potential that these guys were, that members had something to fear from these guys. And there's basically threefold, that's basically comes in three different forms. The first is the damage that it would do to sort of the Russian narrative. And that has nothing to do with did Imran Awan hack the DNC instead of Russia. From my perspective, that was never what it was about. It was just that look at things from a PR standpoint the way that campaign operatives do. When you've got 2 days after the DNC is hacked, you've got Debbie Wasserman Schultz's IT guy hacking Congress, those things are going to blend together in the public consciousness, and it's going to be pretty hard to isolate Russia and make it this whole big villain, and it would have become just a very different narrative. The second thing is the embarrassment factor that Democrats had, because these guys, they exempted them from background checks. Again, they had no qualifications. One of them, a lot of them didn't even go to college. They had bankruptcies, minor criminal records. They weren't showing up to work. There was so much going on here that was just completely decimating this narrative that Democrats care about about cybersecurity, and kind of the whole Russia thing is dependent upon, Democrats really hate hacking. Well, it turns out that some of the most vocal Democrats out there, like Ted Lieu from California, he hired this guy with no training and a bankruptcy and criminal record, and put him in charge of all of his servers. You had members of the Intelligence Committee like Joaquin Castro and Jackie Spear, Andre Carson, doing the same thing, and none of them seemed to know or care. They all just kind of played dumb and pretended they didn't know what was going on here. And then the third thing is that it wasn't just hacking going on. There was a second scandal that involved the finances of the House of Representatives. So remember back in the 90s, there was the congressional check kiting scandal, the banking scandal, where a lot of offices were kind of skimming a few bucks off the top. It's kind of similar to that. They would write they would change all the invoices so that everything appeared to cost $499. And the reason they did that is because as long as it's under $500, it's treated as petty cash. And so the Iwans were doing this in all the offices, and it was kind of systematically cooking the books of the House of Representatives. And then this equipment appeared to be disappearing because they made it in such a way that it wasn't traceable. And so the Iwans, when they got caught, they started sending signals out, two different things. The first is they told the Washington Post and others that the members of Congress ordered them to falsify those invoices. And the Washington Post wrote up, oh, don't worry, guys, Imran Awan didn't do anything. The members told him to do that. To any normal person reading that, my God, you just said members of Congress ordered him to falsify, to cook the books in Congress. And so they were very clearly going to blame Congress for this monetary scandal. And then they would point to members' incompetence and negligence on cybersecurity when it came to the unauthorized access. So it gets a little complicated because you have these two different things going on at the same time, the financial fraud and then the unauthorized access. But in both cases, they basically played politics, turned into identity politics, got the Democrats to protect them, and under threat of, they were going to blame the Democrats and the members of Congress if they were brought to trial. So what it seems like happened is they had to make this case go away, because if they were charged with hacking, and seemingly certainly the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act would have applied to this, and literally the statute says if you make unauthorized access to government servers, you can go to jail. Well, that's what the IG found happened, and that's what's in the server logs. They clearly did it. So why weren't they charged? It seems like they had to make this go away behind the scenes to avoid kind of this spectacle, this trial of the century, where all these members would be called as witnesses and the Iwans would be potentially implicating them on the stands. And so as a result, the Democrats, bottom line, kind of chose to put politics over national security.
Well, thanks, Luke. You are doing a terrific job on this story. Keep it up. This is not a story about corruption, but it's also a story about how Congress can be compromised, and that is a huge form of economic warfare, and we need to address it. Because it's national security, this is worse than Watergate. In the war room, we often talk about Chinese doctrine of unrestricted warfare. That may be at play right now in this story. In fact, the Chinese authors of unrestricted warfare said, exposing an enemy nation's leaders on the internet is a new concept weapon. If a foreign government could blackmail Congress, can you imagine the control they would have? Let's turn now to Bob McEwen, a six-term former congressman from Ohio. Bob, welcome to the Economic War Room. We've been talking about the House IT scandal. How in the world could members of Congress give such sensitive jobs to people like this?
Well, the people, this will come to a surprise of many folks, but I firmly believe it, that the members of the congressional staff, particularly the House, are the most overworked and underpaid people in Washington or any place. They literally work, they're exempt from all rules so that they can work 12, 16-hour days, day after day after day. And they usually do it out of compassion or commitment to their country or to their congressman. And so when someone comes along that has a certain skill and say they want to help, that's about all you can do to be as much research is done. And as a result, there's precious little insight into their past, and our adversaries have figured that out and have planted people that say the right things and supposedly do the right things, but then have been able to get access to the nation's secrets.
Okay, Bob, I get it. There's very little vetting to hire staff. But once you find out your IT guy is compromised, wouldn't you fire him immediately? With this scandal, we've seen more effort in Congress to cover up what happened than to protect America. Doesn't that put us at serious risk?
Well, in that case, we recognize that there are some people that actually serve in Congress that are not as dedicated to our country as you and I would be, Kevin. I became involved in politics for two reasons. I loved America, and I hated communism, and I understood that we were in a battle. We found out that when we captured the government in Grenada, when we were asked to go down and help under the Reagan administration, was the first time that we captured an entire communist government intact. And there were all the papers from the Armed Services Committee of the United States House of Representatives. We found out that a staff member for the chairman was taking our nation's secrets from the Armed Services Committee and delivering them to a consortium of communist folks in Latin America. Now, the person that did that was a staffer. That person is now a member of Congress. And as a result, when a person is aware of what is being done to our country, they either love America and are willing to defend it and fire the person or turn them over to the authorities, or just ignore it. And that's where you and I come in. Knowledge, information, truth wins. And when people aren't aware of the battle, and they're not aware of the people that are doing it to us, then we have what we've seen in the recent escapade on Capitol Hill.
Bob, thank you so much for sharing with us. You should be able to see why this scandal may be worse than Watergate. It was 2 years after the break-in that President Nixon resigned. He wasn't impeached for the crime. It was the cover-up. It may take a couple of years before we know the true extent of the damage here. But the point is this: your Congress has been compromised. It's absolutely essential that we as a nation uncover who is pulling the congressional strings and for what purpose. This means we need to get as much attention on this issue as possible. A compromised Congress puts us all at risk. So here's our battle plan. First, share this story. When you join the Economic War Room, you become an economic warrior for America. Then tell all your inner circle to go to economicwarroom.com and sign up for a free trial so they can watch this segment. Unless we inform voters, a compromised government will sell us all down the river. At your next town hall, point number 2, ask your congressional representative if they've vetted their IT team. Your banker would end up in jail if he failed to secure your information. We should expect nothing less from our elected officials. Third, you need to watch our